Morning YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Just showing you an update on Dizzy's foot, which is almost completely healed. And it's Sunday 14th of August 2016. I'm just getting ready to record today's Outsiders and First Dog on the Moon.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy, and you're not. He speaks the undiluted truth. Joining us this morning, Travis McLeod. He's Chief Executive Officer of the Centre for Policy Development. There he is. Scintilla Chingayipe is a journalist with SBS World News, and there she is.
Hello.
And Sabine Wolf is a commentator, and there she is.
Hello.
Hey, where was everybody on Tuesday night? How'd you all go?
I was in my house, but I never got my code, so I was sitting there listening to or watching everybody being completely unable to access the website, and I'm like, oh, it must be nice to be partaking in this conversation because I never even had the opportunity to get on.
The fact that you were sitting in your house is not statistically significant information, I'm afraid. Scintilla, did you get your form in?
I did. No, actually I didn't. I got the letter.
Yeah.
And I tried to log on at 9 o'clock, and then I thought it was my computer. And so I went on Twitter, and then everyone's kind of talking about it. I'm thinking, okay, so it's not just me.
There was a thing going on. The Prime Minister was not best pleased.
The review and which heads will roll where and when is something that will follow.
The heads will roll, Travis, and I guess they should. But apart from all of that, there's been a lot of discussion about the political sense of this, and the government here kind of being captive to events time and time again.
Captive to events, but also unable to see the warning signs and the bleeding obvious, I suppose. And the warning signs have been here for a while, and I think Greg Jericho put it best when he wrote in The Guardian that the ABS has been held together with duct tape and prayers. And if you go back a few years, I mean, the 2014 annual report of the ABS said that its long-term viability was seriously compromised. Its funding from 2012 to 2015 was 85% what it was from 1997 to 2000. And even the margin of error on its unemployment numbers has gone from 0.2 to 0.4% since 2013 compared to 1978 to 2013.
I wonder if that'll be a bit higher after heads roll. The margin of error will increase.
But the point is that this isn't just a one-off complex event. This is a series of blind cuts, and you cut, and you
diminish the capability of the organisation. Exactly. That seems clear.
But I mean, you do have the chief statistician on $700,000 a year or whatever it is. It seems like a lot, but there has to be a point at which there is some responsibility, right? Like, I understand that ministerial oversight in this area has been somewhat lacking, and I suspect that there's a bit to do.
It's certainly been varied.
It's been varied, and it's moved around quite a lot, is my understanding. But and we did have that issue of an election right in there just before the census. So I suspect there's a lot of people who haven't been kept informed. But ultimately, you do have to look to the head of the organisation, and you as the minister can only really ask, is everything cool? A certain number of times.
Well, you wonder how much the ministers did do that. I guess that's kind of the thing. How much they're just sort of waving this on. But I mean, the other thing, Scintilla, is this thing though of the politics, and that how, yes, that was a debacle, but it becomes such a bigger story because of the environment politically that plays into this government just sort of treading water since the election.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just going back to something that Trav talked about, in terms of the lead up to the census and how, the writing was on the wall, but it really wasn't going to do that great. And the concerns, I think, that a lot of people raised going into the census about privacy and all that sort of stuff. And then for it not doing so well, and then having a situation where you start asking, if you can't get it right in the census and there are concerns about the data and whether it is going to be secure, what does that say? But in terms of the government itself, it's turned into this style of crisis management, constantly trying to react to situations rather than, as we talked about earlier, get ahead of things.
I mean, what's the famous quote? Is it Harold Macmillan? Events, dear boy, events.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting. you know, we are in a period where Parliament hasn't even started yet. So I do think the people who are saying this seriously compromises Malcolm Turnbull's leadership, I think that's probably a bit premature to be making that call. You know, certainly what I've seen from the government thus far hasn't been brilliant in terms of its communications. But I mean, Howard did have a scrappy first term as well. I do think we're probably a little bit more intolerant, and that might have something to do with the fact that we've been through so many prime ministers.
But do you think so though? Like I mean, given you know that Turnbull has been prime minister for a while, it's not like you know he's just become prime minister since the election.
That's true, but you know, I do think that we are operating in quite a different environment in terms of the leeway that we want to give people. And I mean, Turnbull's prime ministership, I don't think he's really had the opportunity to get his feet under the desk. And I have a lot of views about, you know, whether it was sensible to go to the double dissolution election. Spoiler, it wasn't. But
hasn't had time to get his feet under the desk. I mean, he's had almost a year, and there's been almost 2 months since the election. I think events have overtaken an agenda because of the absence of an agenda.
And in this desperation for an agenda, we see a lot of stuff being done. You know, let's be quick about this. Let's be decisive.
Yeah.
The Royal Commission decision, for example. Just this weekend, we're going to now change the WA's GST distribution. I mean, where did that come from?
no, WA's GST distribution, that's been under
we
review
know it's a
for quite a
difficult
long
thing,
time.
but suddenly there's political pressure in Western Australia, so now we have this, you know, we're going to now talk about
We'll do it straight away.
It wasn't announced in the campaign. You know, so it comes across as something that has been hastily put together and you know, a desperation by a government to be seen to be leading and making decisive decisions. And on the back of the talk about maybe Chinese cyber activity with the census, we have the decision on investment from the treasurers until on the power grid decision. I mean, these things seem to be reactive all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. Just talking about that, and I was kind of thinking about what Glenn Stevens was saying in his last speech when he was you know, handing over and kind of arguing the case of this over reliance on interest rates and the fact that, you know, if we are going to move ourselves from a situation where we are trying to fix the debt, the reliance or the over reliance on interest rates needs to change, and the interest rate cuts. And that's where I sort of think the government, to a certain extent, needs to take some kind of progressive stance on the issue, rather than, like we're talking about, just reacting to a situation. If we are trying to get ourselves into a situation that is, you know, moves away from that, you know, high debt situation.
I mean, going to the Glenn Stevens thing, Travis, I mean, he was not so much saying that monetary policy doesn't work, but that it actually needs to be accompanied by, you know, that fiscal thing. Your governments need to do stuff too.
Yeah, he was saying that it's a necessary but not a sufficient condition, and he's been saying this, he's been banging on about it, frankly, since the middle of 2014, to say that monetary policy alone won't do it for you.
And certainly, I guess the thing is, this isn't just characteristic of this government, though. Like, we've been seeing this unwillingness to define, I think, an economic policy for years and years and years now. And that is something to be concerned about, the fact that we don't really know, as voters, where the government wants to take us beyond.
Is that part of the concentration of politics in the centre, that everybody kind of believes in the same thing, and yet what they don't want to express is anything which is politically problematic? So we just have this sort of nothingness around the economy.
Well, I mean, potentially, but, you know, people still want basic economic assurances, right? Yeah. That, you know, we know how to fix the debt, and, you know, we know how to spend money on the things people care about, health, education, etc., like that. You know, and it is an incredible problem, I think, that every time that I speak to a voter, they have no idea. They're like, oh yeah, they want to fix the debt, but I don't know how.
And you see the same slogan, jobs and growth, and no one's actually explaining how that's going to be.
How that happens.
What do you do to get that?
Yes.
Yeah. And also, I think Stevens was promoting the ability of a government to prosecute a pro-growth, pro-infrastructure agenda that actually delivers a return on investment to the country.
Yes.
And the danger of having a rhetoric that was purely about contraction at a time where there was a blind faith in monetary policy to stimulate growth.
Well, miss Glenn Stevens. He was a damn good act. Travis McLeod's with you, Scintilla Chingape as well, Sabine Wolf, outsiders. The other big thing that happened this week was around detention policy.
Some people have even gone to the extent of self-harming, and people have self-immolated in an effort to get to Australia, and certainly some have made false allegations in an attempt to get to Australia.
Immigration Minister Peter Dutton reacting there to the release of the documents by the Guardian Australia, which Scintilla documented an extraordinary history of abuse. But the claim that the Immigration Minister of this country could stand there in a public radio station and say that people are setting fire to themselves to get to this country kind of, I think, locates that conversation, that sets a bar for, what we're prepared to accept as a people, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting, and even if there was some truth to it, that people are making, false stories. I mean, would you blame them? I mean, given the conditions that...
Well, the guy that set fire to himself got to die in a Brisbane hospital, so that proves his point.
Exactly.
He did get to Australia.
But here's the thing. I think I was reading something the other day that the writer Maxine Venable Clark was talking about when we do talk about children in detention, whether they are asylum seeker children or whether it's Indigenous kids in detention. I think what we aren't naming is racism. I mean, this fact that certain directives are being carried out, and we can look away. As a country, leads one to ask, is that the issue? I mean, when you've got a situation in which you've got a terror attack in Nice, and a public personality like Sonia Kruger can say, I identify with that because looking at the photos of that child, that was killed, I could see my own child, but where's the outrage about people that, can they see their own children in the children that are locked up on Nauru or the ones that are in Dondon?
Why can they not? Because, I mean, half these 2,000 complaints, these incidents involve children. I mean, this is systemic child abuse in our name.
We've seen 20 years of othering, though, 20 years of othering of people who come here and who don't necessarily look like us, and we don't see their children in the same light that we do. I think, governments have successively completely failed to cast this as a human rights issue and just a basic decency issue, and instead they have pandered to the worst elements of Australian society because it's easier. It's just easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think the minister's comments sit very uncomfortably with Australian values about what sort of nation we want to be. But the other, I think,
but do they? I mean, this is bipartisan policy. That must represent the majority of voters in this country.
Well, I don't think that it does. I mean, it's bipartisan.
Why does that change?
Well, there's certainly a lack of political will to change the status quo for fear of what took place between 2010 and 2013, no obvious upper limit to the boat arrivals. That seems to be the status quo. But I think the dangerous thing that was revealed through the week was the grand alibis that emerge where you have outsourced human services that deal with our most vulnerable. And the minister was quick to say that this was Nauru's problem. But at the same time, CNN were carrying a report saying that there had been a statement from the department saying that they were seeking to verify with their service providers whether or not all of those allegations had been reported to it. And, as we've seen in employment services and others, outsourced services where you're dealing with very vulnerable children and humans, they create a culture of grand alibis where nobody is held responsible.
And on that thing of alibis, until a closing point, you mentioned the sort of the subtext of racism in this. I mean, there's this other conversation going on. You mentioned Sonia Kruger, who sort of protests. But the important thing is that we should be able to have these conversations which are sort of bigoted without being called racists.
That's freedom of speech in this country now.
But, I mean, when you think about it, when you talked about why this policy has bipartisan support and the fact that politicians can come out and say this, when we've got an environment in the country at the moment that is giving rise to this anti-Islam and nationalism, it feeds into that. This idea that if we bring those people here, what could happen? Could we turn into Paris? Could we turn into Belgium? It's safer for these people to be there, despite the fact that their human dignities are taken away from them, that's okay because we're safe, and it's not our problem because it's Nauru's problem, despite the fact that we put them there, and we can just look away. We can look away.
ALP starting to arc up on this, of course, with talks of Senate inquiries and so forth. So look, we'll see if that plays further. It probably should.
Okay, he's just about to cut, so I will too.